Welcome to Job chapter 11. We're just doing these very rough and ready videos to go alongside our Bible reading plan through the book of Job as we're preaching through it on Sundays. It's just helping us to get the Bible open, get Job open, begin to allow it to work in us as we understand its message better and better. We're in chapter 11, but it's worth us just landing ourselves back where we are, literally sort of in our imaginations. So chapter 2, verse 7, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And Job took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. This after Job had lost all of his family and all of his fortune. He's in utter desolation. And it's here that his friends meet him. And now we meet his third friend, Zophar the Naamathite. And he is now going to speak. Chapter 10, Job having freshly said, God, take my life. So that's Job's condition and situation as Zophar speaks to him. And Zophar's like Beauty and the Beast. Some of what he says is so lovely. And I think it'll just thrill our hearts. And if we're here just listening to this and we're not a Christian, they're really applicable to us. They're mainline Bible things to say. And yet the way that Zophar takes them, he just uses them really cruelly, in a really beastly way. And I hope we'll see that as we go through it. So we get some lovely moments, verse 7 to 9, lovely description of God's wisdom, 13 to 20, a lovely description of God's offer of life, and yet really real cruelty and barbed comments as well. So 1 to 6, we see Zophar kind of gearing up. He's responding to Job, and look, I'm not going to sit here silently as you mock God. Maybe he's thinking back to chapter 9, verse 22, where Job says that God destroys both the blameless and the wicked, and Zophar is shocked by his accusation against God. Should your babble silence men, and when you mock, shall no one shame you? But no fear, Job, I'm the one who's going to shame you, says Zophar. Imagine saying that to a man in Job's condition. There we go. He's kind of, I guess, trying to speak for God. Concern for God's glory is Zophar. And so he's zealous to speak. And he accuses Job in verse 4, for you say, my doctrine is pure and I am clean in God's eyes, which isn't actually what Job is saying at all. He's by far from saying my doctrine's pure. He's struggling in agony to make sense of the world. He used to see the world the way that his friends do. If you're good, good will happen to you. If you're bad, bad will happen to you. If you're God's friends, go well. If you're not God's friends, go badly. But he's God's friends and it's not going well. And so his whole worldview is churning around, and he's processing this as in agony before the Lord. And he's not saying he's sinlessly perfect, but he is blameless. He's got integrity. He's genuine. In short, he's a believer. He's just a believer in God who's longing to walk with God. But Zophar thinks, sort of paints him a slightly different picture and says, I wish God would come and kind of shut you up. I wish God would come and speak to you, and he would tell you the secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. That word manifold is literally twofold. It's like there are two halves to wisdom. There's what we can see in the world around us in our lives as we make sense of that. But then there's also heaven and God's plans. And God has both sides of the coin, and he could tell you exactly what's going on. And of course, we kind of smile in a sense, because if he did, actually Zophar would understand that we already have kind of two sides of the coin from chapters 1 and 2. We do kind of have a sense of what's going on. And it's a bit different to the way Zophar sees it. But then verse 6, and this is the really cruel and arrogant thing that Zophar says, know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. Look, you're only getting part of what you deserve. All this stuff that's happened to you, it's just a little bit of what you really deserve for your sin, Job. Well, that's a really cruel thing to say to someone who suffered so much. Imagine the situations in your life that are hard, and someone saying, well, it's because of your sin, it's much less than you deserve. It's no comfort, is it? It's awful to be told that. And it's arrogant, because suddenly, having spoken about God's who is manifold in understanding, Zophar magically knows both sides of the coin. He understands what's going on with Job. Of course, ironically, doesn't have a clue, does he? Because of chapter 1 and 2. And so he then moves to verse 7 to 9 in a really barbed way. He speaks of God's wisdom. And he's sort of saying to Job, look, you can't search out God. God is too amazing, too mighty. He's too deep. He's too wide for you. Of course, if he said for us, that would be a different tone, wouldn't it? But he's really just putting Job under this, because so far, well, he knows and he understands. It's as if, well, God's too much for you, Job. For me, I do actually understand the depths of Sheol and the heights of heaven and all the rest of it. And verse 10 to 12 he's talking about Job. He's not saying, oh, imagine. He's basically saying, look, this is it. God passes through and imprisons and summons the court. That's what he's done with you, Job. He knows worthless men. He's found you out, and this is your situation. And quite frankly, only really stupid fools question God. Verse 12. Do you see how Zophar's words are really hard words? But then, verse 13 to 19 are really lovely words, aren't they? Even 20, although it's terrifying, as a piece, he'd be a great evangelist. He's speaking true things here, isn't he? He's saying, look, the answer is to turn back to God. You prepare your heart and stretch out your hands towards him. Turn and pray to him. Trust him and look to him. And he will lift you up. It's verse 15. Surely then you will lift up your face without blemish. So you were downcast. You couldn't look God in the eye. You were ashamed. And then you can lift and you can look him in the eyes. You can be face to face with God. You can be secure without fear. Your misery will go. The darkness that you've been under, intense darkness, will go, and you'll be in the light of day. You'll have safety and hope and peace and a place in society again. And what if all this does happen in chapter 42? But then there's the terrifying threat. But the eyes of the wicked will fail, all way of escape will be lost to them, and their hope is to breathe their last. What do we make of Zophar? Well, as I say, these are lovely and true words. True for us, perhaps we're not a Christian, we stumbled across this video and you're interested in suffering. And this is a call to you. If you're someone who's not turned to Christ, not turned to God, here is true words. This is the way to have peace and to know God as our friend, as the one who's with us and for us, rather than us facing him and his judgments. We're just to let go of the iniquity that's in our hearts, our sin, our bad treatment of others, bad treatment of God, and to trust him. And he will lift us up. He will forgive. He will change us totally. And there's a great warning. If we don't, then our eyes will just fail. There's only one life, and then we will face God face to face. And as we breathe our last breath, all hope will fade, and we will be before God, facing him as our just judge. So it's a sort of terrifying but a wonderful application of the gospel. And we just think of Jesus' warnings about hell, how serious hell is, how terrible it is. Do anything to flee it. Fits with verse 20. However, isn't it so misdirected to Job, who is God's friend? He doesn't have secret sin. And so Zophar's badly misusing scripture, badly misusing truth, because Job is a real believer. And so if we're a real believer in God, we're not suffering in our lives because of punishment for our sin. Maybe we've done something sinful, that there's consequences for that which come from that. But Jesus has borne our punishment in our place. And so we're not to be under the burden that Zophar's putting Job under, of feeling that God is our enemy, because he isn't. These fires we're going through are testing fires and purifying fires. They're not hellfire fires. They're not a foretaste of God's eternal judgment on us. And Zophar's badly misapplied God's truth in this situation. And then ironically, Zophar sort of lined himself up with Satan Seems a bit weird, doesn't it? But he has, because in chapter 1, Satan says, look, God, Job only worships you for what you give him. And here Zophar is saying, look, if you turn back to God, you'll get all this stuff, get all this life. And if Job goes down this route, and the motivation that Zophar brings to him, that isn't actually a motivation of God, but is that you'll get out of your misery, then actually Satan will be proved right, won't he? So it's nothing to do with God. It's just we're all self-interested people. And that's the sort of irony of Zophar, is that he turns out to be sort of, in a sense, more like Satan. He's an accuser and a deceiver, yet he has beautiful words, and we need to learn from his bad example, both that we might look to Christ and we might look to not speak Zophar-like words to one another.